What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Assemble Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Jones. Whether I'm hitting the trails, training for an ultramarathon, or pushing my limits in the gym strength training, I've always been fascinated by what drives us to perform at our best. This podcast is for everyone, from the serious endurance, strength, or hybrid athlete to the outdoor enthusiast who wants to live life to the fullest. I believe that peak performance is an assembly of physical training, mental fortitude, emotional health, and social support. Whether you're training for a sport or viewing life itself as the ultimate athletic event, join me in redefining limits and living a life full of challenges and adventure. Let's get into today's podcast. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the podcast. It is the first podcast of 2024, so this is exciting. We've got Kate Allgood on the podcast this week. She's a former Olympic level ice hockey player. She holds 2 master's degrees in psychology. She's currently a mental performance coach and CEO of Quantum Performance, where she's worked closely with professional athletes from multiple leagues to increase their performance through mental training. And her first book, Get Into the Zone, became an Amazon bestseller on increasing performance through mental training. So, Kate, how's it going?
Good. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you. I'm excited about this. We've had kind of a string of sports psychologists and stuff on, so it's been a neat kind of run of podcasts on mental training. So I'm excited.
Nice. Good to hear that you're focusing on that side because that obviously is overlooked sometimes.
Oh, yeah, it's super important. I'd really love to get into what you're doing now, but I'm really interested to kind of take a step back into your background a little bit and hear about your introduction to sport and kind of how you got up into the Olympic level hockey, just to give some background as your experience before you got into the mental performance side of things. So could you tell me a little bit more about when you got into sport and your journey up to, that Olympic level ice hockey?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I got into sports, very, very young. I could skate before I talked. So I think that says a lot about me and the importance sports and being active had in my life. I am from Toronto, Canada, so hence why I could skate before I could talk. Kind of that's the way it is up there. And I had my first Fisher Price basketball net by the time I was 3. So sports was, big for me, big in my family. And so I got thrown into and introduced to a lot of different sports when I was young, from hockey to soccer to gymnastics to baseball, softball. So I got a nice education, tennis, golf when I was younger, and I still played a lot of those sports. They were more of, I guess, my recreational sports, soccer and tennis, and give me a little bit of a break and a little bit of a different outlet from hockey. But hockey was something I think I really connected with. Not hard when you're in Canada, and hockey is pretty much everything up there. And so starting at a very young age, I started playing with the boys because back in the late '80s, early '90s, women's hockey really wasn't developed very well back then. So to get decent competitive hockey, you kinda had to start with the boys, and so I just started doing that, and then eventually around there was a couple years where I played both female and male hockey, and I think when I first started to make that shift full time to female hockey is when I started to kind of realize that I was good. Because when you're playing with the guys, it was a little different. I was what they call a garbage goal scorer, so it was just kind of picking up the loose puck in front of the net, nothing pretty. But when I made that transition and we're up against other girls, I started to see that there was, a difference and I was actually very good, and I think that's where it started to, think about where am I gonna go with this? And so I went through high school. I actually ended up taking 2 years off when I was 18, 19 due to burnout, and then ended up going back and playing in college and playing a couple years pro and being kind of under that umbrella of potential candidates for the 2010 Olympics.
I love that you mentioned playing hockey with the boys. My wife actually, we were from a small town and she played basketball with the boys for a while. And she had a very similar experience where when she switched to playing with the girls, it was like, oh my goodness, this time with the boys made me so much better because they were so much bigger and, just in general. So that's super, super interesting. How was that playing with the boys playing hockey? Because hockey is a very contact sport.
Yeah, I only did 2 years of full contact with the boys. So before that, it's pretty normal because there's no body checking before the age, I guess, before grade 7. It was, more equal, and guys haven't had their growth spurts yet. So I was almost sometimes bigger than some of the guys. So it was a little more equal. And then, yeah, you hit grade 7, body checking gets thrown into the equation. Some guys are starting to become 6 foot and they're trying to put you through the boards. And that's, after 2 years of that, I was like, I think I'm good with that. And let's move on to just playing with the girls. But I always loved playing with the guys. I was very welcomed. I never felt like I shouldn't be there. I had some, fantastic teammates, some fantastic parents of my teammates who just were very welcoming. I think a lot of the moms like me because they all had all boys. And so they're like, oh, female to kind of be around. And this is so awesome, right? That a girl is playing with our son. So I think that was just, I was very fortunate that I was put into environments that just were really supportive of being, playing with guys.
Yeah, yeah, that's super awesome. Would you say that early on you kind of had an interest in the mental side of sport, or were you purely focused on the physical side at that younger age?
Yeah, that's a good question. And interestingly, in my recent book, I reflected a little bit more on that, and I think I focused a lot on the physical side, and that's just what you knew to focus on back then. And my parents knew those resources: private skating lessons, private shooting lessons, private all around coach. I had a backyard rink, so we're just I was out there pretty much every day as long as the weather was allowing for it. But I also know that I had intuitively some things I was doing mentally, so it wasn't that I wasn't doing anything on the mental side. It was just things that I think for some reason I seemed to know, like I visualized very young. I would watch highlights of, the NHL player scoring goals, making beautiful assists, and then I picture that in my mind of doing the same thing, and that would be something that would be part of my pregame routine. So I would sit there at at home and do that, and then I was very selective with the music I would listen to on the way to the game to kind of trying to keep that energy that I had created from the imagery alive and getting myself into the right place. Interestingly, for me, I was always nervous. I was like always nervous before every game, every practice. And somehow I gravitate toward chewing gum. So it was an interesting thing where it almost channeled to give my mind something to focus on, just monotonous. And it helped me to manage my nerves. So there were these things that I did, but I didn't connect it, I guess, when I was younger.
Yeah, that makes sense. That kind of leads into the next question I was going to ask, which is it seems nowadays there's a lot more focus on mental training, especially as you get younger and younger. As it seems like some of the stuff that professional sports are doing is becoming more mainstream because of social media and things. And so it's kind of trickling down. So do you think that younger kids can benefit as much from some of this mental training as more professional athletes because they do have developing brains, they have a little less life experience and a little less perspective? So do you think that mental training in kids is a little bit different than professional athletes? What do you think they can maybe take away? What do you think that, they might leave for when they're older, if that makes sense?
I think so. Yeah, I'll try and answer that. And then, yeah, you can definitely let me know if I'm off track. But I think it's important in both the young athletes and the older athletes. And one of the things I think to think about is that the brain doesn't fully develop till you're 25. So there are a lot of professional athletes who are under the age of 25 or even college athletes, Olympic athletes, right? And so it's just as important for them in developing some of those, I guess, I don't want to say basic, but fundamental components of mental training, whether that's imagery or confidence or self-talk. Um, and I think even the older athletes that I've worked with who are maybe the veterans on their teams, I guess, and maybe closing in on retirement, they can still use it, and it may change because I think now that it's so prevalent that this young generation is gonna make it so that by the time they become that veteran, they've already had more exposure than maybe the current veterans of today, and so there was, when I worked with pro teams, more education on that kind of like a younger athlete just because they weren't as introduced to some of these things or really educated on it. But I think then there's a whole other thing that you look at when they're older because there's more maturity that you're able to have more conversations around and go a little bit deeper maybe with the topics or just other topics that you're not going to really touch upon with the younger athletes. So I think very important for the young ones to get that foundation and to set it and to help them get really good at some key things like self-talk and confidence and imagery and things like that. And so then that's going to allow when as they're getting older, you're able to maybe go a little bit deeper, broader with some other things that are really gonna just help them as people and maybe even help them when they transition away from being the athlete, and I think that's really gonna be important.
Yeah, we'll definitely get more into some of those tactics as we move on and maybe come back. But when I was in high school, I ran cross country and I was a head case. We'll probably talk about the stress performance, bell curve. But I was always way up on, always stressed out, a head case, and it really messed with my performance. And I had just enough mental information to know that mental training was important, but I didn't necessarily have the self reflection, self awareness ability to put it into practice. And so I was always personally left kind of frustrated because I knew this was what I was missing, but I didn't know how to connect the dots. And so it was always this constant like roller coaster of kind of going from one end of the spectrum to the other. I was always a head case, way too stressed out. And then to compensate, I would just say, okay, I don't care. And so my performance suffered both ends of the spectrum. maybe that's better nowadays. A lot of things have, changed. Maybe there's more resources, but I didn't necessarily have the resources. So that kind of left me frustrated at that time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, hard to know what to do when you don't have the tools or can't connect it.
Definitely. So you mentioned taking 2 years off due to burnout. Could you tell me more about that? Was that really when this interest in mental performance started to kind of take off, or was that not until later?
I think it was definitely the starting that like the seed got planted. I think during that experience because I ended up going and seeing a therapist and working with a therapist, and they weren't specialized in sports, but I think just that focus on self development and working through my own kind of mental health concerns and things that were occurring in my life during that time obviously started me to realize that there's more to life and to sports than the physical side, that there's this whole other side that's very, very important. And I think that was, as I said, the seed got planted. Then also I think it coincided with that time I went to undergrad, and I initially was going to major in sports management, but I took a first year psychology class, which was a mandatory kind of social science. And I really enjoyed it, and I had never been exposed to it from that side before, and I think then that was also part of the equation. So by the end of my first year, I was like, I think I might wanna change my majors. I kind of am interested in this, and I think it's, so broad. I didn't know exactly where I wanted to go with it, but I knew it could really filter into pretty much anything in life, and so it left the door a little bit more open for me to explore what might I like to do with it, and sports management is obviously very specific. So I kind of figured out at 19 that, I think I need to keep my doors open a little bit more and kind of start to explore what this might look like for myself. So I think the two of them combined together to start to plant that seed.
So do you think, before we move on to kind of the older stuff, do you think that, I had a lot of athletes that I ran with that were very gifted, and their parents or, family pushed them a lot, and they burnt out. I had a friend who he had a full ride to a college, and he said, I'm done. I'm never running again, because he was pushed so hard through middle and high school that it just completely burnt him out. And obviously, like, mental health, especially nowadays in schools, is a very big topic. It's a very big issue, and it's been getting worse. So, like, where do you see, I guess, where do you see the state of that now? Are kids constantly burning out like that because of, society, because of parents pushing them, because of, whatever factors you see? And what would be your advice for that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's become a little bit worse. I burnt out for, I think, pressure, just not knowing how to handle it, and sports being my only thing. And there were some other things going on in my personal life that I think, also led to it, that was outside of sports as well. I think for young athletes now, just because of the specialization and so young, right? As I mentioned earlier, yes, I played hockey. I put a lot of time, energy, and effort into it. I put a lot of dedication into it, but I still went and played soccer, and I still went and played baseball, and I still went and played golf, and I did all these things, and I got pretty much almost 3.5 months completely off from hockey every single year in the summer, and just got to be a kid and go up to my family cottage in Northern Canada and just do whatever I wanted to do, not be on the ice, not, maybe I shot the puck every once in a while at a net, but that was, I think, really, really important, and a lot of kids these days just don't get that, and so I think that's a big issue with why kids are, burning out in sports earlier and earlier, and getting to that place like what you mentioned with your friend where they have options to maybe go to college, and by their junior, senior year, they're kinda like, "I don't know if I really want this anymore. It's what I thought I wanted, but I'm kind of done with this sport and this path just because it's been so consuming, and the pressure, never exploring anything else," or maybe they got put into that sport so young and didn't get to explore even other sports, and maybe another sport would have been something that would have fit better for them. And I think, there's a variety of things from the pressure to just the, I guess in the US especially that, I guess looking to go to college is just such a big thing. To get a scholarship is such a big thing, which creates a lot of that pressure, and I think creates pressure from parents and organizations and everything to have to go all year round. And then, if you get pegged pretty young as, a potential candidate to go to this school or even sign a verbal contract. I don't know what the age is now. I know they've shifted it in the NCAA. But I remember a number of years ago, I had, softball players who were verbally committed in grade 8. And then there's this pressure to have to continue to develop and grow and hope that they still want you in 4 years, and that put a lot of pressure on kids and not realizing that that probably wasn't a great thing for them. And so I think, yeah, there's a number of factors I think that go into it why burnout is becoming a big issue now.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because even just from a non-psychology perspective, it's pretty, like, prevalent that professional athletes, if you look back, they played multiple sports. And just from an athletic development perspective, for kids, it's actually better to play multiple sports because they develop those different athletic qualities. And then, like you said, they get experience with multiple sports and it just makes a better like athletic profile. And I don't think a lot of people know that when they see their kid good at one thing and they just, go all in on it because that's what the professionals do. But that's not necessarily what the professionals did when they were that age. They were much more likely a multi-sport athlete. They might not have even played the sport that they play now in high school sometimes.
No, absolutely. You see that quite a bit where, yeah, you talk to a lot of these pro athletes in different leagues, and I forget. I think there's a quarterback in the NFL, right? Could have easily been drafted in the MLB, right? So I think people do forget that a lot of really great athletes were multi-sport athletes and had even one other sport that was they could have maybe gone professional with. I have a cousin who was like that, and he could have almost gone professionally as a golfer, and he chose hockey. And so I think that's where people they just see that, well, yeah, when you now become a pro, you have to specialize. When I went to college, I had to specialize because that is the sport, and especially for hockey, it's about, 7 months is your whole school year, so you don't have time for anything else. But up until that point, you're still playing a lot of different things and having fun with it.
Yeah, and then you mentioned too being scouted early on. I had a friend on the podcast a few episodes ago who had that exact thing happen to him for the NFL, and then that didn't work out. And you get into the situation where you build up such an identity and a self worth around a sport, and then it doesn't work out when he had finished his master's, he was redshirted, and didn't get drafted. That didn't work out, and so he's at this age now where he's built his whole identity up over middle school, high school, college. As I'm going to be this football player, and then that's just stripped away and you're kind of left with who am I? What do I do now? And it can be like really hard for people, very like depressing, just loss of direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a big thing. When I work with athletes, really trying to help them, yes, be the best they can as an athlete, but try and also very much work on them as people and individuals, and help them to, be ready for when that transition happens, because it will happen at some point. And how do you make that as easy as possible? It's still transition, but how do you, learn to put a lot of time, energy, and effort and commitment into something without it becoming you, and to see it as something that you're doing, and obviously very, very important in that phase of your life, but it is just something you're doing, and there's so many other aspects of yourself, or, what are you learning, or how are you growing through that experience, and how do you take that away? And I think the athletes that are able to really see it from that perspective, have an easier time transitioning. They take what they can from their experience in sport, and then whenever they're moving on to that next thing, they are able to take some aspects of being an athlete and now move it into that, whether it's business or something else, and see it as that they grew through that experience. And now it's just about, putting that and applying that to a new experience.
Yeah, that's been where a lot of growth personally has happened, being able to put on one hat, then take it off and put on another hat. I also work with a lot of ultra endurance athletes. So there's a lot of time that goes into training for that. And you have a family, and it can be very damaging if you can only put on the athlete hat and live that your entire life. So it's definitely a skill and very important. I would argue super important for the recreational athlete because you have so many more people that depend on you and responsibilities. You don't necessarily have the support of a professional athlete who has the whole, psychologists, dietitians, strength coaches. But yeah, I think that that's been a very big thing in my life in 2023 and 2024 is being able to switch between identities, as you would say, and pull identities from different areas and not just be so singularly focused on this is, my entire existence. And I think that's super powerful. So can we move in now to kind of your upper level athletic years? What did that look like for you? You've got two masters, so I'd be interested to hear how you balance that with the high level hockey training. And, you mentioned the season was long, so that sounds pretty grueling. So could you maybe go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess first, my master's I did after I retired, so I didn't have to do that balancing act. I was working, so I had a different balancing act that was happening while I was going through my master's degrees. It is Hockey is a grueling sport because you generally start in September and you go, depending on the level, anywhere from March to end of April. And so it is long. It's a long time, and you're competing a lot when you're, for me, when you're in college, you're practicing, usually 4 or 5 days a week, and then you're playing twice a week. And so maybe one day off a week, and, practices are a couple hours, and then you've got strength training in there. And so it's you're literally, school and hockey. That is your life, and you get some moments of fun here and there. For me, it was It definitely was always hard right after, I think, Christmas break. When she got to January, February, I always found that's where I think I've realized looking back, that's where getting a little more support or figuring out how to deal with that part of this season, because it is now you're kind of getting close to that tail end. You haven't maybe started playoffs yet, which playoffs obviously are exciting and give you that boost of energy. It's been a long season so far, and for me especially, I was usually leading scorer, and I had, a lot of attention on me, so I was getting pretty beat up just from the amount of attention I was getting. So I think I was just getting, drained by that point, and how to deal with that. I really wasn't good, and so it didn't always look the best. My on ice performance was good, but off ice, I wasn't always, in the best headspace, to deal with that and figure that out. So that was definitely something that I had, looking back, I'd wish that I had better tools or ways to figure out what to do with that part of the season.
So, what kind of, if any, mental resources did you have in college? Because people might see a college athlete like they have all the resources, but that might not necessarily be the case depending on, the school you go to, what sport you play, multiple factors. So, you mentioned struggling with it. Did you have resources? And if so, like where were those lacking to help you with the overall picture, not just the sport?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think obviously it's changed since I went through. In my time, there was no real resources. The schools didn't really have it. I remember someone coming in to talk to my team once in my 4 years of playing, or 5 years, I should say, of playing. No, 4 years of playing. And so that was it. Like one small talk, and that was, you don't get much out of a talk. One talk. I remember one thing from that talk. That's about it. And didn't necessarily obviously help target what I maybe needed to get help with. As I mentioned, when I got burned out, I started seeing a therapist. And so that was somebody I did have. Obviously different, right? There's different, I think in one sense, I needed that mental health resource. I needed a therapist. I needed a psychologist to help me deal with things. But it would have been nice, obviously, at the same time to have someone to help me with just the mental side of being a high performer. And how do you, maybe deal with the fluctuations of the energy that you have from based off of the time of the year, the season. How do you deal with just the pressure, the expectations, being scouted, any of those kind of things. And so I didn't have that from the school. And I also, my family, we didn't know that that was an option, that was something that could be a resource. It just wasn't prevalent. So we didn't know it. We didn't look for it. And so that was definitely, missing. But, fortunately, I still did have somebody who was helping me with my overall mental health and dealing with some things, which I think, obviously would have bled into and still helped me as an athlete. And I definitely know come my last year, I really realized having that support was important. And, I think like any person, when you go into the process of maybe therapy or something like that, you kind of hit those points where you're like, oh, I think I'm done. And then you realize, no, this is like a continuous process. You can't just be like, check out, we're done. I did 6 months and now I'm good to go. And so I think I realized through that process that just that continuous, help and working on yourself and making sure that you're in a good place was really, really important. And I don't want to say unfortunately, just it took me to the very end of my career to really, realize that.
So, when you were in the professional space, did you have any resources there, or was it still kind of not really a thing?
No, it still wasn't, unfortunately, really a thing. I think now it is. I know the new women's pro hockey league. I've seen people I know in the space. I've seen them, take pictures at, the rinks and the teams that they're maybe working with. So now it is a resource. But when I was going through it, it was not a resource. It was all about the physical side.
Yeah, it's definitely much better now. I feel like there is a little bit still of remnants of people that are like, "Oh, this doesn't matter. Just put your head down and grit and go through it." Hopefully, if people have listened to the podcast, they know that that's not the case because we've had other episodes where we've kind of touched on that. But real quick, if anybody's listening and they're kind of sitting here, what is this voodoo nonsense? This isn't going to make me better at all. I just need to grit my teeth and, go harder. Kind of what would you say to that person as we go through the rest of the episode?
It's a good one because you hear it less and less, but I think you have to understand that what goes on between your 2 ears. There's 2 separate parts, right? There's obviously the mental health part, which is separate from the mental performance part. And so obviously anybody who's dealing with anything serious, depression, anxiety, or anything along those lines, right? You need to go more of the mental health route, which is separate from the work that I do. And then, for an athlete who is just about the performance and needs help with that, and it kind of is that mindset, I can just grit through it. And it's funny, I actually had a pro athlete who I've been working with now for 6 months who was kind of in that place in her mind for quite a while. No, I just, you just bear down and go. And I think, you have to be open to understanding that your physical skill sets will only take you so far if your mindset and your mental skills are not at the same level. You will hit roadblocks. You will not be able to explore your potential. You will not be consistent with your performance. And so, what goes on in terms of mental performance, it's the same as the physical side. It's skills, and you have to develop them. You have to get very good at being able to direct your focus, at being able to manage your energy, at being able to have consistent and steady confidence, which is a skill set. And you have to work at that. You can't have it based off of, how well am I doing? What's my record? How many goals did I score? And so I think someone who's like, just, bear down and go, I would maybe just challenge to say, well, how's that worked for you so far? And if it has, I mean, maybe it has short term, but long term, it's never going to give you what you truly want, which is a high level of consistent performance.
Yeah, and our previous episodes have really touched on more of the overall, like, how does this fit into your life? Is this a healthy outlet, or are you over relying on this? Kind of more the mental side of things. So I'm really excited to get into more of the mental performance tactics and tools for actually just increasing your performance in the sport. So before we get into that, one quick question I have is something I deal with a lot of athletes, and I don't know what causes it. I think maybe social media and the rise of just, again, discipline, like grit your teeth and do it, is finding that line between, am I kind of mentally pulling back here, or is my body just not ready? If you go out for a time trial, I have a lot of people who self-berate all the time. They might not hit the time they want, and it's, oh, I just quit, when in reality, their body just wasn't quite ready for the time they wanted. So how do you kind of guide people through that? I don't know if you see that often, but I just see a lot of mental berating on the mental side, because people think they should be able to push themselves through everything, because that's kind of what's, put out on social media. If you want it bad enough, you'll do it, run yourself to death. When in reality, like, if your body's not ready to run the pace, you can, like, mentally, if you believe you can do it, your performance will increase. And, we'll probably talk about that. But at a certain point, you also have to be ready to run, and it's not mental, and you should probably stop beating yourself up for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for me, given my demographic and clientele, I would definitely say I see that with athletes who are coming back from injury, where they do feel like, oh, I should be able to do this again, or be at a different place than they are in their recovery process, and then they think I should just be able to will myself through, and obviously helping them to understand and take in the reality of the situation, that things are going to be a little bit different, that your body is needing to, maybe regain that strength, regain that speed. You maybe just need to regain that trust in your body that it can do what it was able to do before, and that, there's a little bit of a process there. I think then there's the other side where, for most people I work with, athletes, right, it's very easy to know if physically they are where they're supposed to be. And for most of them, they are, because they do train, and they train more than they're ever going to need to for their actual competition, right? And that is what, training is designed to be, is to, push you past what you probably need for your actual game or competition. And then we generally probably know it is more of something going on between the 2 years. Like, maybe physically they could do it, but mentally they did kind of stop themselves. They were their own barrier in that instance. But obviously that's an easier thing to maybe check. So if it is something more physical, maybe they haven't developed that skill yet, or they haven't got to that place in their conditioning yet, then that would be something we would talk about. But for the most part, I think a lot of them have, just because that's what they're doing. They're athletes, so they've gotten themselves there, unless they've been injured and now they're working themselves back.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So now I'd like to get into some more of the tactics and techniques, and I'd be interested to hear kind of more where you focus. I think I know, but I'd be interested to hear from you, because the sports psychologists I've talked to and the stuff that I've researched, basically I see kind of two, obviously it's probably more granular than this, but high level, two spectrums. There's the mental performance as far as managing stress, managing, pain threshold, all that stuff. And then there's kind of the more like neurologic performance. I've seen, professional football players where they have like shutter glasses where it'll, shut off and then open. And just for a better example, I see you nodding your head, so but like somebody catching a football, it would shut and open like a shutter on a camera. So you start very fast, so you see a lot of the football, and then you slowly decrease it. That way you see the football, and then it's closer, and kind of increasing that mental ability to, you even get agility training, change of direction, stuff like that. So I'd be interested to hear, do you focus on that at all, or is it specifically kind of the mental toughness, mental performance side of things?
Yeah, I tend to focus more on the, mental performance, or I guess you call mental toughness or mindset side of the equation. I have explored, yeah, what you're taught. Like, I did something called Neuro Tracker at one point with with clients. And I think I circled back to focusing more on that mindset, mental performance side, because I think some of the stuff I was trying to do with that other stuff, I think again, everything has its time and place. But for me, I think that just resonated more. And then especially as we went through the pandemic and what was available, you're not meeting in person and those things. And I think that just resonates more with me and what I'm good at and what I can help athletes with, more focusing on mindfulness, meditation, these things that they can do more easily. You don't need to go somewhere. You can kind of just find a quiet place and do it. So yeah, that definitely is more of my focus. And so for me, it really is about helping them, drive their performance from within them, find that kind of stillness, that calmness within them, kind of see beyond all the noise, whether that's their internal noise of their own self chatter to all the things that surround sports, and just really focusing on, I think, really the key umbrellas of mindset, focus, and energy are some of the biggest ones in self-confidence, right? Those four kind of big umbrellas, I think, encompass really the biggest aspects that you're going to need from a mindset, mental performance side. And then obviously there's a lot of things that fall under, all of those things, but then ultimately everything's coming back to around it. Can you be still and find that inner stillness and drive everything from there?
So obviously, you mentioned this stuff is ongoing process. So this is very, you know, higher level. But could you give somebody that doesn't know anything about mental performance training kind of an introduction to what it is and how it works? It's kind of like you would if somebody came in and had no idea what you did, and they were just like, "Hey, I need to increase my performance." How would you work that person up and explain this to them?
Yeah, I think from a basic, I guess, explanation, it's just saying, there are certain skill sets, I guess, that are usually more intangible, I should say, that impact your tangible ability to do something. And it's really about developing those in the same kind of way as you would your physical skill set. So just looking at everything as a skill set and saying that you can build your self confidence, but there are different tools or techniques or process to that equation. And that's where I help you, is helping you to create that framework, to create that structure, to create that process that's going to help give you that, I guess, end result of more self-confidence, better focus, better ability to manage your energy, have the mindset that you're going to need. But it's all skill sets, it's all muscles similar to your physical side. And now it's just about me giving you that same, as I said, process and framework that your strength and conditioning coach would give you for your physical side.
So in the same way as a physical training, you would kind of progress somebody through mental skills, like work on one skill, build that, like work on another one, maybe work on a few in tandem, the same way a strength program would progress the weight and the volume and intensity.
Exactly. Yeah.
So does everybody kind of have a very similar starting point, or is it really dependent on the individual where you kind of start them out at, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think they're combo. I think there's some foundational components you really do have to look at, but maybe where exactly we start within those different, I guess, foundations of mental performance may vary based off of the person, the individual. One of the things that I in this assessment just helps me to really understand them lot more faster than I otherwise would, so I can really see how do they break down under pressure and stress, what happens to their decision making, their focus, their confidence, and these things then going to allow me to know exactly, well, where do we maybe need to start? Is it that we need to, start with building up that confidence, or is it more that their self-talk just is so, hard on they're just so hard on themselves that we have to maybe focus there first and then go to kind of building up the self-confidence. So kind of remove that negative self-talk first and then go in a different direction. So that's kind of where then we get that more customized, I guess, approach. But at the same time, they're kind of all falling in within that, energy, focus, mindset, and self-confidence.
So how do you assess some of these things? Because clearly, like physically, an assessment makes sense. You do a certain exercise and you can extrapolate that out. Mentally, people might not really have any idea. So I'd be interested to hear kind of how you assess some of these things.
Yeah, so the assessment I use, I didn't put it together. This is somebody, who did it, and it's been around since the 70s, so it's gone through the rigors of, the process of making sure it is, reliable and accurate, and it is, it's designed specifically generally for athletes and other high performers in military and business to help us understand what happens to them. And so that's, the how do we assess that? And then we generally are going to go also just from the context from what somebody is telling us about what they're experiencing. But the assessment is really important because that is the science part of the equation of this process. So there's obviously the art and the science. And so I have to and want to see that part of the equation just to make sure that I'm not missing something, that I am understanding, fully what's kind of going on and being able to see in a snapshot where they currently are in terms of some of those really key areas of mental performance. And then obviously I'm taking in the information they're giving me in terms of what they're experiencing. And that's going to then, help me as I progress along. A lot of it is their feedback and them telling me how they're experiencing, themselves, their practice, what's going on when they get into a competition or higher pressure, higher stress situations. If someone was with me long enough, and especially if they were, let's say, a high school athlete and now they're going into college, I might have them redo the assessment because, again, it is a snapshot. It's, all these things that I measured initially, they're not in stone, like they can develop and change. And so I might have someone take it again, just to kind of see maybe what has shifted, what has changed. And then that would give us some more information. But a lot of it is that after that starting point is just through that feedback and their own self-reflection and what they're seeing or what maybe their parents are seeing or their coaches are seeing and just kind of take all that information in.
So are these assessments questionnaires? Are you putting them in difficult situations and asking for feedback, a combination? What does that look like?
Yeah, the assessment that they take, it's a questionnaire. So it's online. It's 144 questions. And so they have to answer. It's multiple choice and they go through it and extremely accurate. And I've done it with, all my clients that come in. This is part of the process. When I worked with the San Diego Gulls, which is the minor league team for the Anaheim Ducks, we had all the players go through it and then I would kind of go over it with them as well as the coaching staff. And the coaches really liked it because it was very helpful for them in understanding the players and how to best maybe approach them, communicate with them, develop them, teach them. And, it's one of those feedbacks where, you know, we initially had some of the players do it mid-season, my first year there. And so the coach had already got to know a lot of the players. And so when I went over it with him, not really knowing the players myself, he found it to be extremely accurate. He's like, that's spot on. And that's why we then decided to continue. I already knew that it would be spot on, but that obviously helped for him to know that, oh, this is, actually valid. And let's, as we move forward into the next season, have, all the new guys coming in so we get to learn this a little bit faster.
So when you're after the assessment and you're building a plan for somebody, what does that look like? Do you sit down with them, teach them kind of things intellectually, and then have them implement it in a game or practice? Or like, how does that look?
Yeah. So sessions are very much talk oriented, but we are usually going through a piece of the equation, some type of skill, technique, or tool. And it depends if they've walked in, they've had a game, a series of practices, if they have something very specific that they want to talk about, that something's come up, we obviously start there. And then if there's a tool that we haven't, maybe introduced yet, we'll introduce it. If it's about reinforcing and maybe exploring more about a tool we've already, implemented and helping that individual understand how best to implement it or understand, again, it is a practice. And I had this even yesterday with one of my clients. I started working with them last week. And so give them a few little tools for they had a tournament last weekend or last week, I should say. And, so when we talked yesterday, she was like, I did it a little bit. And I was like, that's pretty normal because you're developing a new, skill set. And so then we have to go into how is that going to get built out? How are you going to make that better with time? But then a big part of my work is that implementation. Because yes, we're going to talk. I'm going to provide them knowledge if they don't understand something, help them to understand why I'm maybe asking them to do something. But then it is how do we get this implemented into either your daily life or specifically around your competition and around your practices. So like my clients, they get workbooks, kind of journals that help to, take the stuff we're talking about and start to really, flow and implement it into their life. And then again, that's a part of our sessions where they've written some stuff out, which allows us to kind of go through it and maybe pull some of the key things out that we need to really focus in on and then continue that process.
So do you ever have people come in and kind of be in more of a fixed mindset where it's, hey, they think, people are born with this, you're born with this or you're not, versus it being a skill that you can build and get better at? Because that's, a big question you see online. And a lot of people ask, okay, is this mental toughness, to put it in quotes, is this like something people are born with or something you can develop? And there's a lot of debate around that.
Yeah, I definitely have some clients that are fixed mindset, and that's part of my process. I'm trying to, make it so that I have and get clients that are not fixed mindset and maybe those who are fixed mindset, it's not the right timing for them because you do have to be open. You have to have a little bit of that openness to knowing that this can be built, that you can build this through work, through process, and trust the process, even if you're not 100% sure where it's going, because it's a little bit different than the physical side where you can see that, that strength being developed. You can see yourself pushing more weight. And this is a little bit more subtle and you have to trust, especially in the first probably couple months, really trust what I'm asking. But yeah, I've definitely had people who are a little bit more fixed mindset where I think there's a part of them that knows they can develop it, but they're almost rigid to develop it in one sense. They're like, "No, this is the way it needs to be." But as I said, part of my process is trying to make it so I bring in clients who are more of that growth mindset because, my goal is to help them, and that makes it very hard, and I want someone to succeed, and so it's again finding the right clients for the work that I'm doing.
So I'm interested in how you kind of measure progress in people. Clearly, you can see physical progress as time goes on, but are there any other ways you measure progress, maybe based on how they feel? Obviously, there's a lot of factors that go into performance on a day. So how do you kind of weed out the noise to see, did this help you, or was it that you slept a little more, or you were a little less, overtrained, fill in the blank with whatever else could have affected performance on that day?
Yeah, I think part of it is time, and that's a part of, like, initial programs for that people are expected to, kind of commit to is there's some time behind it. It's not 1 or 2 sessions, which allows us the time to see some type of progress and to know that it's not just because of, usually in that period of time, they haven't changed physically. Obviously, we do take into account if, maybe they've taken a break. Like, I had a bunch of athletes who have had breaks over the holidays, right? They're not playing their sport for a week, and so we know that, yeah, of course, they're maybe feeling a little more relaxed and things like that, which is obviously going to be a part of the equation and an important part of the equation long term anyways as they go back into their season to have the energy and the mindset that they're going to need. How I measure it is what I hear them saying. So that feedback they're providing for me and then their own reflection, their own assessment of themselves and saying, I felt more confident. I felt like I had this challenge or this obstacle and I could feel myself and I could see myself handling it differently than I would have a month ago or 2 months ago or however long it's been since maybe we've been working together. Or, maybe I hear it from a parent or they may not recognize it yet, but maybe they hear it from a coach where they're like their coach says something like, "Man, we really saw that difference in you," and they've been seeing that person for years and working with them for years, and they started working with me, started implementing things, and now they start to see some type of change. Where exactly it comes from, it's obviously a comprehensive approach, right? I don't think it's just one thing you can point to. I think it's everything comes together, right? From sleep, hydration to your effort, your attitude, mindset, your focus, all of these things obviously come together. And when you start to pull it together, that's where you really do start to see that difference. And sometimes you're going to definitely see some difference after a couple months, and then that's just going to kind of grow. Again, if that person is committed to that process, really in that more growth mindset and willing to put in the effort and the time into it as they do their physical side.
So I say a lot, and it's not my saying, but it's hard to read the label from inside the box.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people, I'm sure, come to you and aren't really sure what their roadblocks are. And to you, it's fairly clear, but to them, they don't know any of this mental performance. So they're not really sure where the focus needs to be. So if you had to generalize, obviously it's going to depend on each person. Are there any big areas that you see a lot of people struggling with and kind of hitting up against roadblocks and they're not really sure what to do from there? And then how do you start to work them through that?
Yeah, I think you're correct. I think some people definitely have a general idea or not much. They just know they're struggling in some way, shape, or form. I would definitely say it goes back to why I focus on the areas I focus on. So self-confidence is a big one, self-talk under that umbrella, I think is a huge thing that athletes really struggle with. The ability to kind of what you were mentioning earlier with your own struggles, that connection. How do I connect, what I'm experiencing that moment with the right tool, the right technique to have the awareness of what is needed in that moment. And that's definitely something that I help them with, right? Gaining that awareness, gaining maybe the tool belt and the different things that they're going to be able to do. Focus, I think, is a huge one as well. Focus determines so much as an athlete, and so that ability to place your focus on the right thing at the right time, to be adaptable with your focus, is definitely something that greatly influences an athlete's ability. And as I said, mindset, your attitude, your ability to know you can respond to anything, to not focus on the situation or what has happened that's outside of your control, but you get to make that choice of how you respond and channeling your energy in the right way. So I think those are definitely the biggest things, but I definitely self-confidence is such a huge part for athletes, especially trying to learn how to drive that confidence from within them, to build that confidence from within themselves versus having their confidence be dictated based off of, as I mentioned earlier, like what their external world, like the praise, the validation, the accomplishments, to make that just more icing on the cake. And yes, those are nice, but you have to really drive that confidence from within you.
So it really is a lot of like mental reframing and like you said, between the ears. Obviously that's probably where a lot of the work happens. Do you have anything that you do that kind of marries up the physiology and the psychology? I know on social media and stuff the last 3 or 4 years, like box breathing has been a big thing. A lot of these breathing techniques. Do you have anything like that you implement? Is a lot of it mostly, in between the ears?
No, definitely breathing I think is very, very important because you said it does help to connect the mind and the body and help to obviously tackle both things, and that's a part of the equation. If you're starting to get nervous, you do have a physiological response. Your heart rate does increase, your breathing rate increases. You're gonna get, muscle tension potentially and tightness, right? And so you have to, understand that those 2 things are happening together. And, so the breathing is very, very important. So whether it's box breathing or diaphragmatic breathing or just meditation on a regular basis, which is obviously going to help make you maybe a little bit better with being a little bit more even keel, I think is very, very important. And then the same thing, if you go back to the energy, right? Setting the tone with your energy and focusing more on energy, that does help to sync your mind and body for high performance. So kind of feelings like joy, appreciation, love, compassion, they have been shown to help to sync your mind and body, elevate your hand-eye coordination, make better decisions, better mental acuity, better focus. And so that also too is going to help bridge that, bring the mind and body together, which is then going to help someone be able to perform.
Yeah, and on that same line, I'm sure a lot of people have heard the quote, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. Is there any understanding yet scientifically of why that stuff is? Or is it just kind of seeing that this has this outcome? Like obviously neuroscience is still very developing and there's still a lot of stuff to learn. But I'm curious if there's any explanations to that stuff, or again, if it's just we know this works and we don't quite know why yet.
I think there's always, you said, it's always growing. So I think there's probably been answers to it, and they're still continually trying to figure out exactly the why. I think from my perspective, I'm sure there is a scientific reason behind it. That's not my area of expertise, so I won't speak on that. But I think from my perspective, when you that quote, if you think you can, I think because it helps you to deal with the obstacles, it helps you deal with the failure, it helps you to reframe things, it helps you to respond versus to react, right? To understand you have the choice to respond, and it helps you to keep going, I think. And I think that's the biggest thing when you really believe in yourself, that self-trust is huge. That ability to say, you know what, there's going to be some hard times, there's going to be obstacles. I can't control everything. I get to control myself and I believe in myself. It's going to help keep you moving forward. And I think that's where when you see people who are successful, it's because they kept going and other people stopped sooner. And so I think from my perspective, that's probably why something like that does help you ultimately then be successful.
I love that. That's something I tell myself a lot. I think Alex Hormozy said it that every time something hard happens, just tell yourself this is when more people quit. And so by staying in power, by having the endurance and sticking through, I increase my odds of success. And I remind myself that during exercise and business and pretty much everything. Because there are a lot of hard times and you don't have the 10,000 foot view yet. You haven't been to the other side, so you don't know like how this is going to turn out. And just having that ability to stick with it even when you really don't want to is super powerful. And that self-belief. I'd be interested to hear any quick tips that you give people. Obviously, again, it's a very in-depth process where you're kind of building on skills, but are there any quick wins, very easier things that people can start to do to kind of increase their mental performance?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, there's quite a few. I'm gonna go just because of something you kind of said, quick wins. I think, and it goes with confidence, focusing on small wins, small successes every day is really, really important. It's an easy thing, and it's something that people don't do because we're too programmed a lot of the time to look at what we didn't do well, how we need to grow, how we need to be better, and not really looking at, the things that we did well, and to focus on those every day, and to understand that that's how you build true, steady, long lasting confidence. Is not your big wins that's going to give you that steady confidence over the long haul. It is those things that you can point to every day and just say, look, I did that hard thing, even if it was a small hard thing, and I overcame it, I figured it out. Or even just showing up. Maybe it was just a day, and it was a hard day, but you showed up, you still gave 100% effort. And that was the small win for you that day. I think that's really, really important is focusing on those small wins, and starting to see that there's not more to you in your equation than just the things you need to get better at or the things you didn't do well enough in your mind, and that there are also things that you did well. Another thing I like to tell people It also falls under confidence and it's part of your mental preparation. And people don't generally focus on mental preparation, they just focus on the physical preparation. Is, we want to have an ideal way that things are going to play out, but obviously things in sports are never going to usually play out in an ideal manner. There's always going to be some type of obstacle, something not going according to plan, some type of distraction. And so to strategically sit there, a few days out beforehand and really look at some of those things that could pop up. Anything from being late to the weather to things you know about yourself and what you tend to maybe do in certain situations, in certain moments, and to figure out what your action plan is going to be. How are you going to respond? Right? We all want to be able to respond in that moment, but you have to actually think about that and really not in that moment when you're not in the heat of the moment, when you don't have those emotions or that energy, kind of that pressure moment to really think about, well, what can I do to respond in that moment? And that's going to help you to then be able to actually do so because now you've already thought about it. Now you just have to follow the plan you've already set out that you think is going to be the best for you in that moment. And then the final one is, I think, just self-talk and learning how to be more neutral with our self-talk and learning to focus more on what we can control, the actions we can take. You can sit there and look at the reality of the situation. You may not prefer it, but then focus in on the moment, the step you're taking and the action you can take, because I think self-talk, everybody understands the importance of it. I think a lot of people just don't put the same time and energy behind it that is necessary because it's the most important, one of the most important, I should say, skills that you have to develop and focus on. And I think people just don't want more all the time. I want more tools, more techniques. And I've had that a lot with clients where they're like, "Can you give me more things to work on for confidence?" I'm like, "But how good is your self-talk right now?" Right? That's if your self-talk isn't good, I could keep giving you things, but it's not necessarily going to make a huge difference for you until your self-talk gets better.
So, on that note, you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast music. And for me, I work with a lot of endurance athletes, and a lot of people want to throw music in on the long run. And I obviously don't have the experience or credentials as you, but I encourage people to forgo the music because it gives you some time to work on the self talk versus drowning out maybe the negative voices at, 45 minutes into a run. But could you maybe speak to music? You mentioned using it like correctly. Are there, again, maybe maladaptive ways people use it and then how could people use it to increase their performance without maybe those maladaptive things like not being able to work on your self talk?
It's a good question. I don't think I've actually looked too much at the maladaptive potential to music. I think you're maybe correct in the term that you're talking about. If someone's using, especially if they can't listen to music while they actually then would compete, that would then potentially not give them that opportunity to work on things. I think at the same time, though, maybe there are times where it's okay, right? It's okay to listen to the music while you're going on a long run. And that's, giving your mind almost maybe a little bit of a rest and just something to help you kind of get through the actual training. But then maybe, making sure that you're balancing that out with taking the opportunity to make it more like it would be in a competition or a race to have to work on that self talk. Because if you can't listen to music in your competition, you wouldn't want to always be listening to music while you're training, just because then that's not going to translate and you haven't been able to then develop the skills that will be necessary for the reality of the situation that you're going to be facing when you're competing. Um, I think I guess maybe it would be maladaptive or just maybe not the most effective is the word I would use in terms of music is, prior to a competition or a game is I think a lot of athletes get focused in or have been told like, you got to get your energy going. You got to get into this like raw, super pumped up place. And for some athletes, that does work. Every athlete needs to understand what level of energy do they need to bring, what type of energy do they need to bring, and then what music is going to help get them there. And if you're getting too pumped up, that there is such a thing as getting your energy too pumped up for yourself. And then that could hurt your performance. And so I think that's where you have to understand where are you and then what are the options. Maybe if you are really low for whatever reason, you do need to listen to a certain type of music that would get you very pumped up because it's going to now elevate you to the right spot for you. But if it's going to elevate you too much, that now becomes not the best choice or selection for you. And then same on the opposite end. If you are too amped up because maybe it's a championship game, the energy's flowing, the nerves are flowing, you need to find music that calms you down. And that can be right. And some people think, well, why would I listen to some very relaxing, calming music before I'm about to go out there and, do this very intense physical thing? But if it's going to help kind of bring you down, similar to maybe some breathing techniques, that's going to really end up elevating your performance. So you have to, that's that part of that self-awareness, which is really, really important. And that's, one thing I actually forgot to mention, that's a huge part of my work with clients is helping them to develop their self-awareness, helping them to understand themselves, because that's really the key. Understand where do they need to be, and then what are the things that are going to help gravitate them to where do they need to be.
Yeah, that's super powerful. For an example, in sport, like in a sport like powerlifting, the meets are very long, so you might want to amp yourself up. Personally, I amp myself up with music before the lift, and then I actually throw my noise canceling headphones in and play classical music because there's sometimes hours between lifts, and staying at that red line all day is just going to burn you out. So the noise canceling AirPods with classical music definitely helps there. And then the same thing with an ultra endurance race. If you get super pumped up before you're about to go run for 8 hours, that's probably not like the best move. And then you've mentioned meditation before too. I watched the Rose Bowl this weekend, and they were actually discussing how some of the athletes meditate before games. And that kind of ties into what you were saying. People might be confused because, again, like the Rose Bowl is a large game, so they would think you want to be amped up. And all these players are sitting on the sidelines or, in the end zone, barefoot, like meditating. And it might confuse some people. So that is definitely the explanation there, kind of bringing that, like we talked about, there's a graph of bell curve. It's in a lot of textbooks on if you're too, they say aroused, but like too stressed, too anxious, your performance suffers. And if you're not aroused enough, your performance suffers. So there's kind of a ideal range, which is different for each person and different for how trained you are and how experienced you are in the sport.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. That bell curve is very, very famous. And so, yeah, it kind of goes along that line. And I tend to then to get more into, I guess, the more specific, what is that sweet spot for every person. I usually use a scale from 1 to 10, 10 very, very high energy, like flames coming off of you, and one total relaxation, and helping athletes and people understand that it literally is just energy. And so whether you're nervous or excited or pumped up, it's all energy. And from a perspective of performance and how it impacts your focus, which is the big thing that energy is going to do. Not only could you burn out and obviously not manage your energy effectively, but it does impact how you are focusing. And that then goes back to what I was saying, is you have to focus on the right thing at the right moment. If you're not, you're going to underperform. And so to figure out on that scale, where is that sweet spot for somebody? And I have my clients, one of the techniques I use to help them find that sweet spot is have them think about past performance, where they were in their mind at their ideal level of performance in a competitive setting. And then to think about on a scale of 1 to 10, what level of energy did they have? And so everyone is different. I've had clients who it's a 2, other clients it's an 8, other ones it's a 4, it's a 6, right? And then that's where you start to then understand where do you need to be, and then how do you gravitate yourself to that place beforehand. And then, as you said, for yourself, how do you, if you have it where you have a moment and then you have a long break, how do you not burn yourself out? Or how do you not get too calm, but then be able to still amp yourself back up, right? All of these different techniques and strategies. And so that's something that we start to focus on. And then as they start to maybe implement it, they, start to get a little bit more understanding and know if that's the right number for them, or maybe it needs to shift a little bit because obviously they went off of a memory. But that definitely helps. It gives them a reference point versus it being a little bit of just kind of like, do I need to get more pumped up? Do I need to become more relaxed? I don't know where I am. It's something that they can just kind of do an internal reflection on in a moment, scale of 1 to 10. Where am I? Where do I need to be? So what are my tools to either come up or go down?
And I'm sure you also work a lot like intra competition. Obviously, it's probably different for each athlete, but for example, like an endurance athlete, if you start to focus on the pain, then it can sometimes become like overbearing, and you feel like your whole existence is pain. But then maybe you throw some music in, or you drink some water or something, and it seems like that pain just goes away, and it can seem kind of confusing to people. So I would assume a lot of your work is awareness about how that works and tools to kind of mitigate that inside a competition or a training session, fill in the blank.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, as you said, like for an ultra runner or something, that pain or anything that somebody's experienced, there's the awareness component of the equation of just maybe being aware, being more the observer of that sensation, especially if it is a physical pain, which allows you to then make a decision. Do I redirect my focus somewhere else to just kind of then be focused on something else? And with that, that pain will subside. So it's not about pushing the pain away. It's just about, do I become aware of it? Is it something I need to pay attention to? Because obviously sometimes that is the case, right? There are times where maybe you do actually need to pay attention to the pain that you are experiencing. But sometimes maybe it is just, okay, I need to redirect my focus, because if my focus is on just the pain and continually on the pain, that pain is going to grow. And that's all you're going to be able to focus on and see. And that's going to be the experience, which makes it then harder to keep going versus, do I redirect my focus? So some of those tools, like you said, like music or drinking, right? in that moment, you're redirecting your focus, which helps you to manage what you're experiencing.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So being mindful of time, is there anything else, any other tools or techniques or anything you wanted to share or any ways that you work that you want to share with people before we, close up?
No, not that I can think of. I think I covered a lot of good, starting things, and I think people, if they want to kind of start there, I think that's good. You start adding too much to the equation, and things start to drop. To if you do it too soon. So I think what I've said is a good starting place for people.
And then my last two questions are, do you mainly work with people in person or do you do remote? Do you do a mix? How does that work?
Yeah, I know I definitely do a mix. So if people are in the San Diego area, then there's the option to come in. Even some of my local clients still do video just for time and efficiency. And then no, I definitely also do remote work, both with local clients, but also I have clients around the U.S. and Canada and around the world. So yeah, that's definitely an option if people are not in San Diego.
Where in San Diego are you?
Well, I guess if you know it, so I'm in what's considered. I live in the Claremont area, and then my office is kind of in the Sorrento Valley area.
Nice. Yeah, I lived there for a few years. Think about moving back depending on the house prices and everything. But that's why I asked. I love it there. So,
Yeah, no,
um,
you can't beat it.
no, you can. It's beautiful, especially for good training weather. Arizona, Southern California, lots of triathletes move out there to train because it's beautiful. So then my other question for you is, you know, you say, you work with a lot of professional athletes, you have a professional background. Do you also work with a lot of people who maybe are more like recreational athletes? They take their sport seriously, but they're not obviously getting paid. They have a job. And how would you work with them? Because obviously they aren't in the same physical place that a professional athlete is. So they might feel like they need to be a little bit better physically before they start to explore the mental aspect of training. So kind of how would you address that? Do you think that, everybody can benefit? I think I know your answer, but, I'd like to hear what you say.
No, absolutely. Yes, everyone can benefit no matter where they are in their journey and no matter what level that they're at. Yeah, so I do work with obviously a lot of pro athletes and Olympic level and college, but also high school athletes. And I've worked with, I guess, would categorize as the weekend warrior, people who are adults and have jobs and but are still very active in the athletic community and do triathletes, or, I guess masters level kind of competitions and things of that nature. And it doesn't matter if you're at the same level as a pro athlete in terms of your physical skill development. If you can work on your mental side, because you don't want the gap to be created where your physical skills very much supersede what your mental skill sets are. And so I've worked with young athletes who are still developing physically and starting to help them with their mental skill sets as well. So for me, it's not really about the level of the athlete. It's really about, are they ready to commit to this process? Are they in a space, like I was saying earlier, maybe a little bit more of that, focus on self-development, growth mindset, really wanting to explore this and being open to the process and looking to grow. So yeah, I do definitely work with a range there. And I've worked with, individuals outside of athletics. I've worked with some individuals in the military, Marine fighter pilots, people going through the SEAL process, some cops trying to go to SWAT, right, to go through that testing process for their physical side and how to kind of mentally help them lock in for that. So there's definitely different, avenues that this can also be used for.
Good deal. So if people are interested in working with you, how can they find you? Website, email, Instagram, etc.
Yeah. So my company name is Quantum Performance. And so my website is qpathlete.com. And then the QP Athlete is also my handle for Instagram and X. On YouTube, it's just Quantum Performance. And then my email is kate@qpathlete.com.
Good deal. Put all that in the show notes too, so people can just click through and they don't have to type anything. So Kate, any last words before we hop off?
No, I'm pretty good. This has been fun.
Yeah, it was awesome to talk to you. Thank you for coming on. I'm sure people will get a lot out of it. I know I did. So I really appreciate you coming on. And yeah, hopefully this helps people set up for a solid 2024. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. If you enjoyed it, it would be helpful if you could leave a rating or a review on whatever platform you're listening on, as that helps us reach more audiences and get more awesome guests on. If you're interested in anything we talked about today, you can check the show notes for all links. Otherwise, I will see you guys in the next podcast.